And next guest is Jeff Utecht. He is an educator, consultant, and podcaster and author. In his heart, he will always be a fourth grade teacher. Jeff has been a keynote speaker and presenter for the past 13 years, having presented in 20 different countries, and has helped to upskill more than 50,000 educators. Jeff's passion and purpose is to prepare students for their future, not for our past, which drives his love for learning and education. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I recorded as a guest on your podcast last week, and now we're doing the opposite, and you are a guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast. We'll start off with the question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think like every educator, it's hard to narrow down what's one trench, but I think, as I was thinking about coming on to your show, I think for me, the biggest, I don't even know, I guess it was a trench, it was a shock, is my first year teaching right out of college. I got lucky in that I graduated in 1999, which was the first year of state mandatory testing here in the state of Washington. And so all the positions were, they started testing in fourth grade. And so of course, all the positions that year were fourth grade teachers. So I ended up being a fourth grade teacher. And cause that's where you should stick all your kids coming out of college, first year mandatory statewide testing. But I ended up getting a job at a elementary school that was of a very high fluency, high economic status. We used to joke that kids would, and not that we were joking about it, kids would actually try to come to pay for their lunch with a credit card. And we're talking 1999 to put this into perspective. But it was just that type of school, very, very affluent school, great kids, great parent support, just very affluent population. And then the next year, my wife and I got jobs. My wife's a school counselor, and we moved across the state. And we moved to a school that was 99% free and reduced lunch, where we had kids coming to school every day. For the first time that I'd ever been in a situation where the school was feeding students breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We were doing laundry for kids. I remember bringing loads of laundry home for students because they had 2 or 3 different changes of clothes in their backpack. And it was honestly a shock.
Yeah.
Just a shock to going from one end of the spectrum to another end of the spectrum and finding myself not knowing how to get out of that trench. It was overnight. Like one year you're teaching at this school, the next year you're teaching at that school, and the pace of learning slowed down. What those students needed. We talk about SEL and social emotional learning, and we spent more time doing classroom meetings than I think we did anything else.
Yeah.
Going on home visits. I'll never forget, we did a home visit with a parent, and her goal for her son was to complete 6th grade. And if her son completed 6th grade, he'd be the first in 3 generations.
Wow.
That's just what we were, that was the population of the school. And so I found myself in this situation where I had to figure out, how do I take my own mental capacity and my own mental mindset of what it is to be raised I was raised by 2 teachers in a pretty middle-class income household, to be thinking about, okay, what is different for these kids and what do these kids need? And luckily, like I always encourage new teachers, is find your mentors. And I had some incredible mentors who had been teaching at that school for a long time that really helped me through that journey to get through those 2 years of teaching there. But they were 2 incredible years. It's where I got my first technology grant there. We had 1 computer to every 4 kids. I had 33 kids in my 4th grade class. Because I told the principal, we knew we were going to be overloaded in 4th grade. I was like, give me every extra kid, because it meant more technology for the school.
Okay.
So we were able to get, 7 computers, and the kids knew the IP. We knew that all the computers were named by their IP addresses. The kids learned to network computers. This is 2001, 2002. But it was an incredible journey. And as I was getting ready to come on here, I was just thinking about what those 2 years did for my own mindset of what did it mean to be in the trenches? What did it mean to truly understand your students and get to know your students, and what do they need? learning your timetables is second to having breakfast, lunch, and dinner,
Sure.
and just having to kind of reset what education is and what it should be for different students.
Yeah, yeah. And that really is kind of that story of resilience in the fact that you kind of went 180 from one school to another so early in your career. Taking laundry home. Now a lot of the schools invest in laundry machines,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
really working on those students' needs. Before that was really that hot topic that we're talking
Yeah.
about now with SEL, but really finding out what you could do to get resources, and the kids, able to learn the best way they could. So let's talk a little bit about what you do with shifting schools. So you have a lot of thoughts on different things that are kind of hot topics in our classes today, and they have been for quite a while. So first of all, let's talk about the cell phone conversation. No matter what the age group is, usually you're having to deal with that kids grade 3 or 4 and up. So what are your thoughts on having cell phones in the classroom?
Yeah. And I think it's just, it's good for people to understand that, I've been an educational technology consultant since 2009. I've seen, 2009, to just put that in perspective. It was the first year the iPad came out. And so we're dealing with, the iPad and the iPhone, and, what are we going through with all of this technology stuff. And, if you want to do a Google search for me, I did a thing for Microsoft where we went a little bit in depth into this idea of the cell phone. But right now, I think, the cell phone, you can look back and there are different technologies that come along, and we as society adopt them before education does. And education is still trying to hold on to the quote unquote traditional way that we do things for a lot of reasons. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying that's a wrong, at all. We're slow to change, and education should be slow to change in my mind. But we do need to change. And I think if we think back to the idea of the calculator, the calculator for a long time in the 70s was really a horrible thing. Like, we didn't want kids using calculators. We still wanted kids to memorize all their multiplication tables. And then all of a sudden the calculator didn't need a cord. And when the calculator didn't need a cord, and a kid could have one on every desk, and it could be powered by the sun. If you remember those days, we were struggling with kids cheating with a calculator. And so we took the calculator away, and what happened? They put it on your wrist. And for those of you who, I can age myself here, but you might remember the cool kids in school had the watch that had a calculator built into your watch. And all of a sudden you could be doing math with your watch. And so then we're having to ban watches. And all of a sudden we fight this technology. And then I don't know what changes. At some point, something changes. And now, when you're a high school kid going into calculus class, oh, by the way, you have to buy a $170 calculator. Like, all of a sudden now it's the tool that everybody needs. And I feel like technology, especially in education, goes through this. We fought laptops for a long time, and then everybody needed a laptop. And then we wanted every kid to have a laptop. I talked about, the first grant I got, we believe this is through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation here in the state of Washington. They did 1,000 teachers a year for 4 years, because the research at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s was, we will change education if we can get one computer to every 4 kids. That's where we started. And then slowly we were down to one computer for every 2 kids. And then this idea of 1-to-1 came out because the price of technology came down, and all of a sudden we have internet in schools. And then we're trying to block the internet. And now we're going through it with cell phones. And the difference with cell phones is, what we're seeing a personal adoption through society. And that is what I think schools are struggling with right now. Is it's like students bringing their own calculator from home, and the teacher saying, but you can't use that in my class. And at some point the parents say, but why not? And I think we're reaching this point because there are so many different things that are going on in schools today. One of top priority, and we're seeing this in the news, is safety. Parents want to have their children to have access to a phone to call them in an emergency. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's the pressure that we're feeling. At some point, we need to understand that for better or for worse, these students are on their devices. For better or for worse, it's 2022 and the cell phone is not going away. For better or for worse, we better understand and start learning how to use it, or we're going to be in a fight that I don't think we win.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of schools that are struggling with that right now,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and in the schools who are embracing it, and embracing it, I mean, do you have your student body, you know, do you have your ASB officers having conversations with school administration around what is our cell phone policy?
Yeah.
Why do we want or don't want cell phones in class? And having students be a part of that, because we do not understand their lives in those phones. And I
Yeah.
think that's so hard for us as adults. You know, I grew up in a time without technology. I grew up in a time when my mom literally kicked me outside the door, me and my two brothers, kicked us outside and said, don't come back until dinner. And we
Mhm.
ran around the neighborhood without a cell phone, without a watch tracking our every move. There were neighbors that kind of watched out for all the kids. People probably remember this, but you just ran wild until you got home at 6:30, 7 o'clock, and we weren't even allowed to come inside. I mean, my poor mom had 3 boys. We weren't even allowed to come back in the house.
Mhm.
That is not the way these kids are raised today,
Yeah.
right? I hear parents all the time say, I wish my kids would go outside and play like I did. Well, I didn't want to go outside. My mom forced us to go outside.
Mhm.
But you
Mhm.
can't do that today in society, because you become a quote unquote bad parent because you're not monitoring your child. Or we kick the kids outside and then we check them on their cell phone every 5 minutes to make sure they're exactly where they want to be.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there is social pressure that this generation is feeling that I don't think we understand, nor can we, because
Yeah.
we weren't 12 or 14 or
Mhm.
16 or whatever age you are, and understand the social pressure these kids are under today.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I believe it's schools and it's education's responsibility to support kids in that. If
Mhm.
we are talking about social emotional learning and we're not talking about the impact that technology is having, we're missing the big conversation.
Mhm. Mhm. That leads us to blocking sites from students at school because, there are certain sites, like some schools will block YouTube. Some schools, might block different media outlets, for example. What are your thoughts on that? You said that the federal government says there are certain sites that have to be blocked, but when we're talking about certain media outlets or YouTube, which can be a good resource, but it can also be a waste of time. What should districts do?
Yeah, I've always supported districts in trying to understand what the balance is in that.
Mhm.
And I think first and foremost, to your point, is understand when we talk about the Child Internet Protection Act, SIPA,
Yeah.
which I'm sure most teachers have heard about, there are only 3 things by federal law that you actually have to block for schools, in schools for students. And you can go and look those up. We won't talk about those 3 categories here. But the second part to that is these students have unfiltered access outside of school. And and we should be filtered in school. But I think the level of filtering needs to be of a place where we can still access the information
Mhm.
that is vital to the way learning takes place today. And we just look at 2 statistics that have come out recently. The Pew Internet Research, and if you go look at the Pew Internet Research, I can send you
Mhm.
the link for the show notes.
Okay.
But the Pew Internet Research just did research that came out, and they did research in 2014 and 15 with middle school, high school kids, with teenagers. They did the exact same research in 2022, exact same questions.
Mhm.
In 2014 and 2015, the number 1 social media site that was used by kids was Facebook.
Okay.
In 2022, Facebook doesn't even make the top 10.
Mhm.
And the 2 that are top are YouTube and TikTok,
Mhm.
both of which were not even mentioned, or TikTok wasn't even around in the
Mhm.
2014 study.
Yeah.
Now, in the study, they are showing that 92% of the kids that they surveyed say that they're on YouTube every single day.
Yeah.
It showed that 78% of teenagers say that they're on TikTok every day. So what does that tell me? I'm not just looking at YouTube and TikTok. I'm looking at the majority of students today are using video as a
Mhm.
way of learning.
Yeah.
The number 1 thing that's coming out right now is that this generation uses TikTok like a search engine, which blows
Mhm.
my mind. I don't get it. I'll never understand it. I'm a text-based child raised in a text-based world, trying to teach a video-based brain. Why are instructional videos so good? Why are instructional videos best practice? because for better or for worse, and I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying the brain in front of me is video first. And so we have to start looking at, okay, well, what sites am I using? How am I actually, one of our big focuses over at Shifting Schools is around media literacy. And that is part of it. How am I, do I know how to watch a video for learning? Do I know how to pause it and stop it and rewind it and take notes while I'm watching the video? Do I understand that when an advertisement pops up in front of me, what they're trying to sell me? What's the angle? What's the music playing in the background? Are we actually having kids debrief this stuff? And then we turn around and we use it against them. I want to debrief TikTok videos because I want an assignment where students are making videos in a genre of TikTok. And I'm not saying you have to upload it to TikTok, but kids know the genres of TikTok. There are a whole different genre. Like we have genres of writing we're still focused on. There's genres of videos. There's how-to videos, and there's sing-along videos, and there's lip-syncing videos, and there's, why don't we take some of those and bring those into our classroom? Truly start looking at the culture of our kids today.
Yeah.
What is the culture of our kids? And it's not a culture that I understand. It's a culture we have to learn, and we have to somehow wrap our head around so that that's our job. That is what you signed up for as an educator, is to understand the children that are in front of you. You don't have to like it. I don't like TikTok, but I don't have a choice to not try and understand what the poll is for the kids sitting in front of me, because they do. And that's my job. It's not about me, it's about them.
Yeah, no, that's really important to remember, like learning their culture, right? Not trying to fight against us. Well, if there's one site students should use in class, what would that website be?
Such a great question. I get asked this one a lot, and I've been promoting this website for a long time now because I think it still gets a bad rap in school. I think schools are slowly coming around to it and understanding it. But again, you can do a Google search for me. I've done twice now. I've done talks at the UN where we talked about this one website. And if there was one website that I think you could use every day in class and teach kids to do, that one website is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the largest body of knowledge ever created by mankind. It is in every language you could ever want it to be for world languages. It has the ability for you to go in and edit and add and create. When we talk about Wikipedia, sure, there's the side where we have to understand how to use it. We have to understand how you go in and can you rely on that web page? That's one side of it. But the other side of it is, if I go in and I find that the page has a lot of mistakes, it is my responsibility as a human on planet Earth to click the edit button and make it right. The thing that frustrates me the most when I'm doing trainings with teachers, that they're like, well, I saw this Wikipedia page and there was something wrong on it. And you better not say that in one of my trainings, because my first question to you is, and you fixed it. The edit button is there for everybody. And as a human, number one, and as an educator, number two, your job's to fix it. Just fix it. And then teach your kids to fix the mistakes. We'll link to it I'll send you a link for the show notes. I do have a free PDF over at Shifting Schools. That is how to understand Wikipedia in 3 links. Okay. And the reason why I get on my Wikipedia bandwagon is because when I was a student growing up, every classroom I went into, there was a set of encyclopedias on the bottom shelf of every classroom. Yeah. And I cannot find one today. And the thing that replaced it is better. It's bigger. It's more reliable. It's actually more accurate. And we tell kids not only not to trust it, we don't teach them how to use it. And you use it differently than the ones on the bottom shelf of your classroom. There is a way to understand what pages you can trust. We stopped comparing textbooks to Wikipedia in 2013 because the research showed Wikipedia was better than your textbook. It's overwhelming. Like, go out and just say Wikipedia versus textbooks. Put it in Google. You will find the research against history textbooks, against science textbooks. Doesn't matter. You would be better off teaching through Wikipedia, if you know how to use it, than teaching through your textbook. Every page on Wikipedia is ranked A, B, C, D, F. Maybe you've heard that ranking somewhere before. The problem is nobody knows where to find that ranking, and it's 3 clicks away. If you know the right 3 clicks, you can figure out, oh, I'm looking at a web page that is rated an A+, that has had academics look at it. There's a rubric that they use that they go through every single Wikipedia page on. It's incredible. It's an amazing resource that is a nonprofit created by mankind from every perspective around the world, trying to make it the best it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use it with our kids at every grade level. I've had fourth graders in South Carolina make a Wikipedia page about a church in their community. That's a famous church from the 1700s. It didn't have a Wikipedia page. They did the research. They went on a field trip and took the photos. They wrote the Wikipedia page for a historical monument in their city. I've had high school kids do the same thing. High school kids going in, finding they're really passionate about a topic, go join the community. Don't write the paper to me. Go tell the world about this passion of yours.
Mm-hmm.
There's an edit button right there, top right-hand corner. It says edit. Can't miss it. Go make the world a better place. That's what education is about. And we can do it through one simple website, wikipedia.org.
Yeah, no, I see your points there. And I think it's something that educators need to think about, like the ways of like making a page when there is no page for something like the monument. The fact that a lot of these paper encyclopedia books had errors in them, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's a way of looking at the rating as well. So I'll definitely link the free PDF so people can view that. And let's talk a little bit about the shift from what has been blended learning for about the past 10 plus years to what the future of education is, and what kind of the high flex model is.
Yeah, so I think most teachers are probably, have heard the term blended learning, where we were trying to use technology as a way to blend this idea of our digital world with our physical spaces. And we're still trying to do that in a lot of places. But I think coming out of the pandemic, we are in a completely different place. And of course, like always in education, society has a lot of pressure to deal with that. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of different ways right now in education. There's a lot of social pressure for education to be different for our kids. And the pandemic, I don't think helped us in that way, but it is going to force us to change a little bit. And I think what we're seeing this change from this idea of blended learning, where we still have kids in front of us on a daily basis, and we're trying to figure out how technology fits into our lesson plans and how do we engage and enhance what we're doing with technology, to what is being called a high flex or a hybrid is really where it comes from. This high flex model of learning. It means a hybrid, flexible model of learning, a high flex model. It's been used in colleges for a while. There's some research out around universities, but I think what we saw during the pandemic is we didn't know for the most part that we were using a high flex model in K-12, but we started to adapt it to what can be used in a K-12 setting. And I think going forward, it is something that school leaders and teachers are going to continue to hear about and continue to see. And a high flex model, basically what you have to start to do, and this is the major mind shift change that I'm supporting schools with, is you have to build for the internet first, in my physical classroom second. And that is a shift from the way we were all taught back to my college days in the late 90s. I need to make sure that I am leveraging instructional videos. I need to make sure that I'm leveraging technology, because we are getting into a situation now coming out of these last 3 years where we had kids learning from home, or we were in hybrid, or we were 6 feet apart, or wherever you ended up being in those years. We're coming out of this with society. Society is now saying, parents are now saying, I'm not going to wait until winter break to take that trip, and flights are going to cost me $1,500 per person.
Yeah.
I'm going to go, the first week of December when flights are only $800 per person, and I'll just pull my kid from school because my kid can still learn online, right? You all know how to do that, right? I mean, you did it, therefore you can. Therefore, I can pull my kid whenever I want because they're not going to miss anything, right? And the expectation coming from society is I should be able to take my kid out anytime I want, and you should be able to still teach my kid no matter where my kid is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is causing us to create high flex models of learning where we have to be thinking about, how do I make sure that these students who are coming and going, or in my class 1 week, out of my class 1 week, or, I mean, right now the flu is going around in schools and kids are, at home and not coming to school. How do we make sure we reach out to them? We have school districts who are rethinking, like, maybe there's never a snow day anymore, which really makes me quite sad as it's snowing here today in Seattle. But maybe there's no snow days anymore because we can still learn from them because we know how to do it. We know how to do it. We have the technology. The thing that's missing is the pedagogical switch in our brains.
Yeah.
There's a different way to do it. And by high flex, I don't mean zooming kids into my classroom. There is no research, and I want to be perfectly clear with this. There is no research that even comes close to saying having a third grader sit at home watching their class through Zoom leads to any type of learning. We learned that during the pandemic, and there's no research to back it up. When we're talking about high flex models, we're talking about, how do we really use what is best practice in 2022, which is instructional videos. I want instructional videos in my Google Classroom or my Canvas course or Seesaw or whatever I'm using for students learning at home, but they're also great for kids in my classroom. They can pause them, they can rewatch them. And back to our earlier statistic, the average child in America watches their first YouTube video at age 2. Age 2 in America, your first YouTube video. By the time you get them at 6 or 8 or 14, they've watched hundreds, if not thousands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How are we engaging a media first brain in our classrooms?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have to change. It's best practice in 2020.
Yeah, you talk a little bit. You talk a little bit about how that is also the true inquiry-based model as well. So if we are shifting to that, my kind of pushback would be that teachers would say that's extra work to make those videos. Because we're not, like, you don't have half the class out on quarantine anymore. If maybe they're filming themselves while they're already teaching the class, but a lot of teachers would say, well, that's extra work for me. So how can we put less work on their shoulders?
So I would say it's the biggest thing we have to do is we have to rethink how we use our time, because it can't be extra work anymore. It has to be the work that we do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It used to be extra work to make the worksheet. And now I ask kids questions and give them the internet for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It used to be extra work to have to go down and make overhead transparencies. Anybody remember that? Like in the copy machine? We don't do that anymore. Right? That was extra work. Right? Technology replaces technology. This is a big shift. But here's what I would say. If I make that instructional video, I use that same instructional video, not just for kids at home, but I want kids in my classroom watching it too.
Mm-hmm.
Because kids in my classroom can stop me, rewind me, pause me. They can translate that video into whatever language they want the moment they need to hear it in Spanish or Tagalog or Arabic. That's a game changer. That's accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm walking around the classroom having individual conversations with students instead of sitting in front of the classroom, making sure every kid knows 2 + 2. Every kid is helping to learn on their own 2 + 2. And I'm helping every kid individually. Or I know the kids that I have to go and support because I don't need to be up in front of the class teaching that lesson for the 5th time today.
Yeah.
It's different. It's not more, it's different. Can we get to a mindset where it's different, not more?
Mm-hmm.
And what can I take off my table if I think of it as different?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a teacher here that I was supporting in a school district with that got into it. It was his morning routine. He was a middle school math teacher. And he taught 4 preps of the same math thing. And so instead of saying the same thing 4 periods in a row, he'd go into class in the morning. He had to be at school a half hour before the kids. Go in, made his video, had it uploaded into Google Classroom before period 1 every single day. It can be done. Just means changing your time different. And we're not talking about perfect videos. The research says I don't need the video to be perfect. It shouldn't be perfect. There needs to be ums and uhs, and you need to make a mistake because when you're in front of the class, in front of that whiteboard, you do the exact same thing. You are not perfect in front of your kids, nor should you be. Your video
Mhm.
needs to be the same way. It needs to be you, not perfect.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's a pretty similar to that flipped classroom model in that book I read back in 2011. And I see that there are still teachers that haven't embraced that and that kind of have gone back to the same old of, like you said, teaching the same thing 4 or 5 times a day, instead of being available to support kids, right? Kind of teaching that whole class when we do need to have the flexible learning models. So you have your organization's Shifting Schools, but you also have a podcast. So talk a little bit about the podcast and how that supports your organization and your consulting, and what kind of guests you interview on the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, you can find information about all of that over at shiftingschools.com or my personal website, jeffutecht.com. We'll have all that in the show notes for sure. But we do have over 60 resources, free resource guides over at Shifting Schools. My colleague, Trisha Friedman, loves making free PDFs for teachers. So if you go to shiftingschools.com and up at the top, it says free guides, and there are a ton of them. We are huge into protocols. We're huge into scaffolding learning for students. We're huge into inquiry-based learning, and we call them ready to roll resources, where basically you just download the PDF, you put in your email, it emails it to you. The reason why we do that is that signs you up for our newsletter. Yes. Which means that you get every free guide every week delivered directly to your inbox. But also we have found that if we send you an email, teachers live in that thing called email inbox. And so it will always, that resource will be there for you when you are ready. But we've got all kinds of free resources over there. We also do trainings. I'm a Google certified partner. So we've got all kinds of trainings on using Google Earth and using Google Maps and you name it, Docs and Drive and setting up Gmail that actually works for teachers. It's all over there at shiftingschools.com. Our podcast, I started podcasting in 2007. It was called Shifting Our Schools back in the time when I was teaching in China. So if you go back into the archives, you get to hear me teaching in China and you get to hear about me teaching in Bangkok. And, we were talking about inquiry learning and leadership back in those days. Today, Shifting Schools still going strong as a podcast, which I'm very proud about. We've got about 280 episodes, 240 episodes, 240, I think, 240 episodes out. We interview teachers, we interview school leaders, we interview a lot of people out in the profession. We've just got done. We do a lot of mini series. So we have a mini series on early childhood coming up. We have a mini series on STEM coming up in maker spaces. We just got done doing a mini series on data jobs. So these are people we have found who, like, New York Times visual journalist. Like, what does it mean to be a journalist today? It means understanding data and how the internet works just to publish a story. Writing is like the smallest piece of what these people do. And so we've got a lot of just great episodes about, preparing students for their future and not our past. And what are these future careers? And so we went out and talked to people that are in these careers and talked about the intersection between language arts and data and art, and the theme that comes out over and over again: collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. How knowing how to collaborate with others to create a team, whether that team is in person or virtual, is critical. So the podcast runs the spectrum. You get to hear Trisha and I usually pontificate every once in a while as well, go on rants. As you can probably tell, I'm pretty good at going on a rant now and then. But yeah, we love it. It's great. You can find it wherever you can download podcasts. That's Shifting. You just type in Shifting Schools podcast. You'll be able to find it wherever you like to listen to your podcast. But yeah, we have a good time over there. Every Monday, we drop an episode, usually somewhere around 30 to 40 minutes or so. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I think that's really impressive that you've had that podcast going for so long. I know a lot of people started in 2020 like myself, but that is quite impressive. 15 years and
yeah,
such a wide variety, and really talking to people that are in the field and they can talk to the intersection and the collaboration with their field and other fields that kids might want to explore. Well, we've had a great time today talking about your views on some websites, some learning tools students should use, and also your trench story from the beginning of your career. Out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I think it goes back to just what the two essential questions that I constantly have in front of my mind whenever I'm working with teachers and everything that we do over at Shifting Schools. Essential question number one, how am I using the world as my curriculum? Mm-hmm. We live in a world where these kids have access to so much amazing information. It actually frustrates me a little bit that I didn't have that as a kid. But I think every educator every day needs to be asking themselves, how am I using the world as my curriculum? And what does that mean for me in whatever subject that I teach? And the second question is, am I preparing students for their future, or am I preparing them for my past? Mm-hmm. And I think those two questions are key for us at Shifting Schools, for me personally, to be thinking about what does the future hold for the next generation. They are an incredible generation. That's a whole nother talk I give about this generation and who they are and who they're going to grow up to be. They're an amazing generation. I know they frustrate us at times in our classrooms, but they are going to do some incredible things just based on what we know of them so far. So we just need to make sure we're preparing them for them and not worried about the way that it used to be when, we had snow days. As sad as it is that these kids might never get those, but times change, and that's what we have to remember.
Well, you've mentioned a few websites. You also are active on several social media platforms. So if you could just list a few of those where people can find you online and connect with you.
Yeah. So personally, you can follow me everywhere at Utecht. That's Jutecht. It's the same handle everywhere. So on Twitter, we share a ton of resources out there. We also do live webinars all the time. So you can catch us. We do live webinars on our YouTube channel and on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Again, all those same places. And because I have to learn this thing called TikTok, I am over on TikTok. I share no dancing as of yet, but we do share some behind the scenes of our podcast. Some of our webinar clips and stuff get shared over there on TikTok. So if you too are trying to figure out this stupid TikTok thing, you can join me over there at Utecht as well on TikTok. But yeah, you can find me anywhere on any of the socials. So
great. I'll make sure to post those links in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today.
Well, and thank you for being a guest on ours. So people have to go to Shifting Schools and they get to hear the other side of this conversation. So it's great.